Just bring those for me. Okay. I mean, I mostly brought them for me, but also. The bottle
just in case.
Oh, yes, thank you. That's what I needed. That is the cold water.
You can get a picture. Get
I figured out the picture. That makes sense. Okay, everyone gets a picture, I'm fine with that. I personally get nervous about like open like this.
Yeah.
Around Are you here for the events?
No,
Nope.
sorry, we're truth crying is back there.
This right here. Yeah, you got time, no problem. The event doesn't start for half an hour, so no rush.
Thank you, thank you.
All right. Oh, sorry, just making sure everything's good here. Seems to be fine. Well, great is the resolution, but you should do for pictures. So that's what you're going for.
How's your life going these days?
Oh, okay. Can't complain. I mean, we have like, albeit a little warm, but lovely weather. Summer's nice and quiet. I just have lots of free time now, so I can't complain. How about you?
Good. Yeah.
And dinner was good?
Dinner was very good.
Excellent.
The burger I had was nice.
Fantastic.
How long have you worked here?
6 years. Yes, it's been, I think, around 2016, I think is when I started. But I'm only part-time now. I actually just finished school and am starting an additional position here in August, so it'll be a journey, but I have loved working here, so no complaints whatsoever. Not an additional. Might be able to play that. Oh, it doesn't have that one here. If it doesn't reach from there, I made an additional extension cord that has the extra on it. Let me see. There it is. Grab it on the other side. Give me 1 second. Hi. Not this one. Joanne is still joining you tonight, correct? Joanne is still joining you? Okay. It's there for you as well. Great, perfect. Is that going to be okay for a setup to go through the slideshow? Okay. I was going to say, do you have a clicker for it and everything? Perfect. You're well prepared.
What did you do your education in?
Library science.
Pardon me?
Library science.
Oh.
It's a library technician diploma, so it's not a full degree, but I didn't quite want to have to move out of the province to do my master's in. So this is the start, and then I can kind of work a little bit and then see where I would like to go with it and decide from there. So I'm not going to worry about doing a master's until I feel like I have a little more of an idea of what exactly I want to do within the field, right? So yeah. But yes, it's good. It's exactly what I want. And working here is what helped me figure that out. So I'm very lucky. I've heard lots of good people talking about the book. They're excited for tonight, so that's excellent. I think we've sold at least a few copies. Last time when I checked on Monday, I think we were at about 7 or 8 so far, and most of the sales end up coming from the events anyway. So at least for the first little while. So I believe you should have gotten all the information as well, but generally we do the talks at about 20 minutes or so. Try to leave about 10 minutes for Q&A and then the rest for signing, if that is about how you time it. Okay, perfect. Great.
How long do they have to do that?
It's been weird with COVID to try to kind of get back into the swing of things, and they're a lot more common in the fall. Not a lot of people tend to release books in the summer for us to do events for, so they're less common over the summer months, but usually in the fall, once we get back into the swing of things, like in a non-COVID year, usually we'll do anywhere from 2 to 3 a week, depending on how often. As we're just kind of getting used to it all and getting the adjustment into the live stream events as well, we're kind of we're doing more 1, maybe 2 a week right now, just to kind of get back into the routine and have everything feel a little bit like we can adjust as we go. So. There's some water back there for you as well. Should you need at any point, we know that the AC in here isn't great at the moment, so try to load her up nice.
That's where we sign up.
And then that'll be for the signing afterwards. Yeah. Should be good to go. Unless you have any other questions for me, I think we're okay. I've got all the information from Rowan. So. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I tried to give you some space so that if you wanted to move around and kind of interact or whatnot, you had the ability to. I'll steal my paper away once it's done. If you would like to move around more and you will be, yeah, the sight lines aren't super great for the side, but I tried to give her a bit of a squish. I just like to leave a bit of space around this board. Hi. All right. Are you here for the event?
Yes.
Yes, awesome. I'll just have to get you to grab a mask out of here.
Okay.
The masks have to stay on. Kind of a, yeah, kind of a gamble.
Is this Wes fellow signing the master?
Yes, he'll be signing them after the talk.
Oh, Glenda sent me.
Pardon me?
Glenda Abbott sent me to come.
Oh,
She's here, but her grandbaby's here.
my grandbaby takes precedence, obviously.
Yes. So I was told to come get a book and get you to sign it.
Oh, yep, we can do that.
Okay, let me grab it.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm Melody.
I'm Wes. Yeah,
I'm Glenda's friend.
yeah, we were hoping that Glenda would be here.
Yeah.
Actually, I have one here.
Oh, excellent.
So it's better on a sticky from this
Good.
paper.
I grabbed the one that seemed the best for signing, but I will trust your judgment.
Right. Put it to Glenda.
And then I'm gonna get one too. Cause I heard all about you.
Are you staying for the talk?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah, we're just in the restaurant grabbing a snack.
My wife Joanne would like to have her signature in there too. 'Cause
Oh, okay,
she was doing everything well.
great.
And make it up to you.
Yes, Melody, MELODY. Let her know she has to find her way. Okay,
Joanne should be over here shortly.
all right. And
That's
do I pay you?
No, you have to pay up at the cash desk.
Up at the
Yeah,
track.
so you can take both of those with you and pay for them up there.
Cool. All right, well, we'll see you in
See
a
you
few
soon.
minutes. Thanks.
Where would I find a wash?
Washroom just behind the cash desk as well. Yeah, if you just go down the center aisle and turn right, it'll be behind the big round desk. Hi there.
Hello, how are you?
Good, and yourselves?
Yeah.
What can I do for you?
We're here for the reading.
Oh, okay. I just saw the camera and I was like, are you looking to set stuff up?
Oh, yeah, we're filming because we're doing the Bison conference and we're filming with Wes. And so.
Oh, okay. Nobody told me that was going to happen.
Oh, okay, well, maybe he.
Okay. Yeah, that wasn't passed along to me, but that's.
Oh, well, we'll just do a little bit of him talking.
Okay, sure.
That's
Okay,
it.
no problem. As long as you don't need anything from me on that front, I don't care.
Yeah.
Oh.
That's all good.
Okay, for sure. And then we do just ask that masks are being worn in the event area while you're in here.
Oh, I see.
So we've got a box right beside you if you need those.
Oh, I see. Okay. You want to set your stuff down and. Sure.
Are you here for the events as well?
No.
No. Okay.
Oh, how are you? Tiger.
I know, we had nothing to. Well, no, it's been really good. It's been really good. But, yeah. I don't let people guess the night before, and then it's so hot.
Yeah.
Trouble with my car. It's got there. It's going to get a bit storm. As fast as it will go. Roll them, you know, as long as it's not breaking, it should be fine. But we managed to get the fast too, and then I went, anyway. So. How's that?
I guess we can use these two chairs. One for you, one for me. Is that okay?
Well, this is exciting for you.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Sure. She was a group that had lunch or supper in a restaurant.
Oh, I see. Yeah, for some reason I thought that banquet tonight started at 6, but it didn't start till 7. So,
Oh.
so we went over there. Oh, we're not going to be able to eat now. You come here.
Yeah.
So.
That's what we decided to. Did you go to one scale? Okay.
Yeah,
You must have been up there before.
oh, I got it. But they have it in the store downtown. They have it in the gift shop here.
We tried to get her hooked in there. It's taken.
Well,
That's additions. And that's fine. Have you been selling any of the pumpkins?
I don't even know, to be honest. Oh, yeah, so. How about you? It looked like you were just doing.
We were doing well, yeah.
crazy.
Sure, they're gonna run. We have 150 copies of the different issues of that. There's one that you walked over to.
The square or something?
She has a Bison ranch in Colorado. It's a little bit shop.
Oh, wow. That one. Didn't realize he was gonna be here.
Yeah.
He was Wanda. Well, apparently the local hill was over there all the time. I just never.
We gave her one of the book.
Oh.
Just look up to her because we want to go there.
Oh, right. Well, she was just telling me that there's a European Bison conference in December.
Only if you call it a bison instead of a buffalo.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hey, you.
Hi.
Can we do it again?
Yeah.
Yes, can it be seen?
She says she hardly recognized you with that ball cap.
I know, I forgot my hat at home. I wanted it so bad. I even went to go buy a new one today and it just had my size.
Is that right? Oh, shoot. You were desperate.
I know.
Should have taken the big white one.
Pardon
Should
me?
have
Oh,
taken the big white one.
People just have to accept the simple first.
Exactly. That's what I think. Even if you're not.
Have a short one.
How was the day?
Good, yeah. Lots of sales.
Yeah. I brought 5 boxes. National Park beside you guys. Yeah, it was a good day. Was able to talk to a lot of folks. It's good. Actually, I've seen a lot of these people alive. So, hi.
Hi. Leroy Amicus asked me to come save seats.
We're going to do the First Nations from the Butters. She's killing the tree, don't they?
Chip away,
Intended.
First Nations. Yeah.
Good, how are you? Good. There, did my duty.
Hi there.
Hi.
Hi, I have I mentioned I'm Greg Adams.
Great, yeah, United University.
Yeah, this is my wife Lori.
Hi, Lori, nice to meet you. Like, I don't know her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So are you at the university?
I'm at the U of A. I left US. Yeah.
You left the US?
Yeah. Tasha Hubbard. Yeah. Yeah. They,
Which is a good.
it's a good thing,
Closer to
closer to them.
Yeah,
I get
that's
to,
right.
you know,
That's close to the bison too.
Yeah.
Wood bison anyway.
Joanne took your pictures of the bears.
Yeah. But I was thinking it's maybe just as well I wasn't there. So it was,
Yeah, you don't want to do that. Yeah.
exactly, that's what's thinking. And the thing about it.
Got to get that little song written out on the search thing. You wrote the original
Yeah,
Yeah, you should. You should put that.
yeah, you might want to. Or something.
Yeah, it's in the cabinet.
Yeah. Oh, wow, I'm glad I didn't know. That was blissfully unaware.
And it's a conundrum for us because we tell people like it's a single way to come in. There's bears all over the place. You know, take the bear spray to the outpost.
Yeah, that might.
Yeah.
That might. And this is the first sighting, right?
We've had bears in the yard before, but I'm not.
Wow.
You say there's a possibility.
Yeah.
You are, if you're
Go
lucky.
here. I kind of see.
On the trail of Keystone species.
I'll just sit
Are you?
Yeah, why don't we sit here?
You know, you're the central attraction, you're not, you wherever
You're the boss. Not be able to see the screen, so I'll just stand here.
No, no.
If you have some books on your front door,
Yeah.
things that are in the press.
Okay,
Just taking these chairs.
You can help it. Yeah.
say both. Yeah, no, I get that. Yeah. I enjoy the process.
Very briefly, I'm going to see
Oh, yeah, I think I said that. Yeah.
Thank you.
It is so.
Do you want me to speak with the mask on or can I take it off?
No, you can take it off once you're speaking up there. It's just for everyone else who's going to be in here. That we have. Yeah.
I tend to talk soft, so.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And with the microphones, I know it's a bit of a different story, so no worries. Yeah, once you're up there and speaking, that's totally fine. We just do it for the rest of the day. Okay.
And do people prefer to use the microphone?
Most people tend to prefer to use the microphone. The acoustics in here do not carry nearly as well as we always think that they're going to. And I have a volume control over here, and I can adjust it as needed to make sure everyone can hear you okay. So sure, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I went there to pay. Well, that's, where's your friend? He doesn't say nothing. Okay. Yeah, we're the back of the bus. Excellent. Oh, perfect. So easy to transfer. Thank you so much for doing that. Sorry for having to call in and. No, if it's
Oh, that's fun. Definitely come by. I'll bring some Tupperware. You guys really like to read
No, you're right. You're right.
well, thank you very much. And then. Okay, that's okay.
Good.
Yeah, as long as we just make sure that. Because then I'll.
Hi, how are you? Oh, very good. Nice to be seen.
Wes, this is my mom, Aisha.
Oh, you're taking my.
Hello.
Congratulations.
Nice to meet you.
Oh, okay, so.
Thanks, how's the conference?
Yeah, good.
Okay, so.
Yeah, life's good. Glad to have this book offer.
Well, I'm excited to read it.
How are you doing?
I'm well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was for
Yeah.
but Sherry and I still always included.
Just make sure.
I'm Annie.
Make sure.
Good.
Yeah.
Like, if there's something you need.
Well, thanks for coming out tonight.
Well, we're super excited to hear about it.
It's a very short.
Yes.
This is normally an hour-long presentation. It's running down to 15 minutes. So pretty brief.
I've seen your hour-long presentations too. So it's fine to see.
Yeah, and Friday, I haven't sure what time we'll leave either, so we might be getting here. This Friday night, isn't there something?
You have an event on Friday?
Anyway, I mean, the schedules seem to change and everything, so.
Yeah, that's all right. We'll do that. Yeah, we'll have it all laid out. The cat will be on the table eating it.
Yes. Perfect, well. Good.
Yeah. And we, I think
And I, it's one of those moments of like,
yeah, so one
I
we
do
do
the
is-
live and I remember you're in the circle. But it takes me a second because I can hear you
If we're
talking.
lucky, around 6.
My senses go off. No, it's
But
that video.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and the dog would be there? Yeah, so that I'm not worried that the dog is. Yeah. Yes. Okay, perfect. Awesome.
That's okay, yeah.
What have you been busy with today?
You always have a crowd with you, so I
I'm ready to go whenever you guys are.
Okay.
Okay, sounds good. I will close this off and turn it
So Santa Fe, we were at. Cherished picture of me smiling as I'm signing the Buffalo tree. I show that off all the time.
Like when we pick up the car.
Yes, I have a whole link that I've set up for you. So don't worry. I do all the introductions from the beginning stuff and then I just so let you go. And then once you're done, I'll come up and handle the question and answer period as well. So
I'll try to keep it short.
yeah, no problem.
Fix this disease problem.
Good evening, everyone. If I could get everybody in their seats, we're going to be starting in just a moment here. Good evening. My name is Eli Hartman, and I'm going to be your host for this evening. This event is coming to you live from Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Métis nations. And a special hello to everyone who is watching at home on our live stream. For those of you who are here in person, thank you for joining us. Out of an abundance of caution, we ask that you keep your masks on for the duration of the events. It is my pleasure to welcome Wes Olson and Johane Janelle for the launch of the Ecological buffalo on the trail of a Keystone species. Thank you for being here. And we'd also like to thank the folks at University of Regina Press for working with us on tonight's event. Based on author Wes Olson's 35 years of working intimately with the bison and featuring Johane Janelle's stunning photography, the Ecological buffalo takes the reader on a journey to understand and the myriad of connections this Keystone species has with the Great Plains. Wes has developed an international reputation for both his knowledge of both plains and wood bison, and is an author of a field guide to plains bison and portraits of a bison as well. At this point, I'd like to invite Wes up to talk more about the book, and if time permits, answer any questions you may have. So let's give him a warm welcome.
Well, thanks everybody for coming out. Can you hear me in the back? Excellent. Stand off to the side so I can see what I'm doing here. So we started this project, writing the book, the Ecological buffalo, about 14 years ago. So it's been a long process to get to tonight. So I appreciate you folks coming out and sharing a little bit of the knowledge about the book. So the talk is the Ecological buffalo. This is normally about a 50-minute presentation, crunched down to about 15 to 20. So, it's a very brief introduction to the concept of the ecological buffalo. And if there's somebody in the room who doesn't understand the term keystone, forgive me if I explain it. In stone masonry, the keystone is that stone at the top of an arch that holds the whole arch together. And if you take that stone out of the arch collapses. Same thing with ecosystems and species that act as keystone species. So how do bison impact the ecosystems they live in? Oh, and I have to give credit. Johane is the photographer. I always have to brag about Johane, photographer. This is a bison in Grasslands National Park with a pair of brown-headed cowbirds in the forehead. Bison affect the ecosystems they live in about three sort of classic ways. They do it through physical disturbance on the landscape. And this is one of the driving forces behind most of the reintroductions that are taking place around the world now. Reinsert those physical disturbances on the landscape. They do it by cutting winter trails through deep snowpacks. Most of the slides are in Grasslands National Park, at the southern part of the province. And Grasslands was established in 1987, but through the purchase of Walt Larson's ranch. And Parks Canada, when they acquired ranches to keep building the park, every time they bought a ranch, they take down the internal fencing and move the cattle from the landscape. In Grasslands, they bought the Walt Larson Ranch in 1987 and took the cattle off. They didn't have a large grazer like cattle or bison until 2005 when we brought bison back there. So quite a long time with no large ungulates on the landscape. And that meant that species that depended on bison to navigate through deep snow didn't have the ability to do that anymore. Antelope didn't stay in the park during the winter months, for example, because they couldn't navigate those deep drifts. So bringing bison back is a really critical part of that disturbance. Manure on the landscape is not a very charismatic thing, but it's one of my favorite things. This is a buffalo patty with Robin had spent a considerable amount of time using it as a listening post while she hunted for insects around there. And bison deposit on average 10 to 12 manure pads like that every day. When you think of the days when there were 30 million bison on the landscape, that's a lot of poop. And wallows, of course, are a very important part of the disturbance that bison inflict on the landscape, as is patch grazing. And those two things, wallowing, patch grazing, and pugging or footprints driven into the clay, are important ecological disturbances. And of course, deposition of urine on the landscape is a huge flush of nitrogen into the vegetation. This is a really neat paper that was published back in '94. A group of scientists postulated that it was the extirpation of plains bison from the Northern Great Plains in particular that allowed the Aspen parkland to increase in distribution both westwards and southwards. Because bison are famous for horning and rubbing and killing small trees, they maintained the Aspen parkland further north and east than it currently is. Wallowing, of course, this is one of my favorite photographs. Nice little bit of green in his lips. Some of the more direct relationships, nobody thinks of internal or external parasites as being very charismatic, other than perhaps our local veterinarian here. But they're certainly a part of the ecosystem and always have been in one level or another. As are predators. Grizzly bears and black bears both have been known to kill bison, but it's unusual. Most of the time they're preying on animals that have already died or scavenging on them. And then leaving carcasses behind. And you think of back to the days of 30 million with a normal average mortality rate of 5%. I can't do the math in my head, but 5% of 30 million is a lot of dead carcasses on the landscape, just through natural processes. That doesn't include human creation. And carcasses provide an incredible pulse of energy back into the system. Incredibly important. This was a trail camera on a bison that had died in Elk Island. It was gored during the breeding season and died here. They put a camera on it and counted 18 different coyotes that came to scavenge on that carcass. And innumerable, there were lots of birds that came into it. Some of them are indirect relationships. Facilitated grazing is probably one of the most important. And I think just about every re-established bison population in North America and in Europe are hoping that facilitated grazing is going to improve habitat for species like the white-tailed deer, Nuttall's cottontail, or mountain cottontail. That's an endangered species. White-tailed and mule deer, and pronghorns, of course, black-tailed prairie dogs. The full version of this has a extensive talk about the role of prairie dogs in bison, white-tailed jackrabbits. All of these are herbivores that rely upon the grazing dynamics of bison on the landscape. And then there's the broader food web relationships. In grasslands, there's 77 known grasshopper species, and they are incredibly important for just about every insectivore that lives on that landscape. There's the grasshopper mouse, for example. He's a predatory mouse, doesn't eat seeds or vegetation like most other mice. He hunts and eats grasshoppers. So if you have a vibrant grasshopper population, then you have a vibrant grasshopper mouse population. Same with the western jumping mouse. And of course, the three main canids there, the swift fox, red fox, and coyotes, all depend upon small mammals, and a huge part of their diet is grasshoppers and other insects. And squirrel nests, this is an example from the Yukon where an old wood bison bull had died during the winter. And 5 different squirrel nests in a circle around that carcass went there. The squirrels went there and scavenged the hair off that carcass and built their nests entirely of bison hair. And that's, of course, is important for the food chain, for the broader food web, because you have more squirrels on the landscape because they have a higher survival rate. That means more prey for hawks that are passing through, or pine martens, or anything that eats a red squirrel. And that nest is a horned lark. I stumbled upon that when she flushed right out from underneath my feet. This is a nest that's built right in the bottom of a buffalo footprint. In the nest, she laid her clutch of eggs, and then a brown-headed cowbird came along and parasitized it with 2 of her eggs. A complete ecosystem. And the nest is lined entirely with bison hair. They're quite neat. Shed bison hair is one of the most important contributions that bison provide the ecosystem. And there's been a lot of work in the States looking at the role of bison hair in songbird nests, especially grassland songbirds. And they found that it provides a thermal warmth to the nest. So you get those wet, nasty spring storms and chicks and fledglings are dying. They found a 60% increase in chick survival in nests lined with bison hair. And it's all because of the way these guys graze the landscape. And bison and cattle can be surrogates for bison, and have been for many years in many places. But they can't create the same kind of grazing mosaic on the landscape that bison do in our sanctuaries and parks, because they don't graze the landscape the same way. And humans control how they graze and move across the landscape. This is where I find the whole ecosystem begins, and it begins with bison snot. It's one of my favorite things. I could talk about bison snot all day. It's the microbiome that drives the entire ecosystem. If we didn't have, in all ungulates, all 4-chambered ungulates require their own mucus to digest the food that they're eating. Because as bison are grazing across the landscape, their noses are constantly embedded in the vegetation. They're inhaling, they have massive set of lungs, so every intake of breath sucks those microbes off the vegetation and off the soil surface. And then periodically they have to lift their head and clean out their nasal vesicles. So you'll see cattle and bison both do this. They'll stop, give each nostril a quick flick. And when they're doing that, they're swallowing all those microbes, bacteria and protozoa that they've inhaled and get stuck in the mucus. That, of course, travels down through the digestive system into the rumen, and first to the 4 stomachs. Millions of these are inhaled and consumed every single day. Up to a quarter of the protein that a bison requires for existence comes from microbes that they digest. So it's incredibly important to the welfare of these animals. And it's a complex system when you get into the rumen. And the rumen is in bison about 45 gallons. I can't convert that to liters in my head. It's large. And it's a fermentation vat. It's the equivalent to our compost bins at home, where we roll a drum and mix the compost. That's exactly what's happening in the rumen. The vegetation lands on top and it's stratified. At the bottom of the belly, it's dry and condensed. And as you move to the top of the rumen, it's more liquid because of all the mucus and saliva that's been added to it. So the fungi break down the starches, so bacteria can digest the starches, and the bacteria in turn digest sugar, protein, and fiber. And then the protozoa, in the scale of microbes, protozoa are huge. These are the equivalent of the great blue whale swimming through the oceans hunting krill. Each of these protozoa will have millions of bacteria and microbes in their digestive system. And that whole system, that whole rumen and subsequent digestive process is designed to break down the cellulose and extract the nutrients that they need. And of course, what survives the digestive system comes out the back end. My wife likes to take pictures of pooing bison, and I like that too, because it creates a charismatic photograph. And within the bison patty, it's another entirely complete ecosystem with predators and prey and herbivores, and really a complex system. It starts out with the fungi, bacteria, and protozoa that came out with the dung. But as soon as that dung pat lands on the landscape, it becomes a source of nutrients for a complex layer of interspecies relationships. This is the first group of animals to come onto the dung pad after it's on the landscape. And many of these can see the inorganic column of material that comes up off the dung. It's the equivalent of the smoke coming off of a campfire, which we can see from a long ways. Dung beetles in particular can see that inorganic column coming up off of the fresh dung pad, and they'll fly hundreds of meters through it. And then once those animals are on the landscape, in come the predators. And again, this is a very simplified schematic. There's been some research that shows that, I think I'll mention in a moment, but up to 1,000 different individual insects will take nourishment from that one dung pad, and often up to 100 different species just on one dung pad. This is the European import, dung beetle called Ecological spimitarius. It arrived in North America in a shipment of cattle into Boston Harbor in 1896 and spread westward. It's now the most common dung beetle in North America. Dung beetles have this neat ability to fly through an oxygen-rich environment and then land head first into the inside of a dung pad, which is an anaerobic environment. There's no oxygen in there. And they can instantly switch from aerobic to anaerobic. The first thing they do then is come to the surface and they keep punching holes that ventilate the inside of the dung pad. They don't actually eat the dung, they're hunting for the protozoa and other microbes that are in there. And historically, there's lots of records of dung pads disappearing completely from the landscape in 3 or 4 days when dung pads had healthy insect populations in them. This is one that we gave this presentation in Alaska, and this is a dung beetle that lives up there primarily on moose, but they're now finding it living in bison patties that have been just recently introduced to that ecosystem. So they're versatile in the diet selection that they do. I did this drawing to sort of illustrate the different functional groups of dung beetles. There's 3 of them. Everybody's familiar with the classic scene of a dung beetle pushing a ball across the prairie, especially from Africa and elephant dung. Well, North America has those the rollers as well. And in this case, the roller females will take a little tiny ball of manure from the dung pad, lay 1 egg in, and then roll that ball across the landscape and bury it either just below the surface or even up in the vegetation. This is on the left there. Dung beetles are the only insect in the world that uses celestial navigation in their reproductive cycle. If you're out on a prairie that's got rollers on it, you'll see them on a full moon night. All the females will leave the dung pad and roll towards the full moon. And if there's no full moon, they use the Milky Way to navigate as a way to disperse their dung far away from the dung pad, the brood balls. Then the dwellers, that's what the Ecological spimitarius stuff over there. They'll fly in and create little brood balls within chambers within the dung pad. And that's where each brood ball has 1 egg in it. And that brood ball serves as the nourishment for that larva. Then there's 2 types of burying dung beetles, 2 groups, fast and slow burying. The fast burying dung beetles will go down up to 1 meter, depending on the soil type, creating a chamber down to a root chamber where she'll lay 1 egg, then she'll go back up, create a brood ball, and come back down to a different chamber, and create another chamber. And eventually, the whole surface of the soil beneath that dung pad is perforated by these burrows going down deep into the soil, which is absolutely phenomenal for distributing the nutrients that are in that dung pad deep into the root systems of the surrounding plants, and moisture infiltration as well. And then the slow burying ones take longer to get down there, and they have a completely different root system underground. But combined, if you have all of those, that whole suite of dung beetles on the landscape, it's incredibly important to the health of an ecosystem like this. And then once the dung pad's been there for a while and the insects have arrived and done their thing, in come predatory birds like the McCown's longspur, endangered long-billed curlew. Yeah, I mentioned this already. One manure pack can host up to 100 invertebrate species and up to 1,000 individual insects. And when you think again of the number of dung pads on the landscape in the 1800s, 30 million bison, that equates to a lot of insects that provide food for a lot of different insectivores. One bison cow has been shown to produce 1/4 of her body mass just from insects over the course of the summer. That's tremendous biomass. I tried to figure out what that meant. How many millions of insects does that equate to with 30 million bison? So I went back to William Hornaday's graph. He has a graph like this that shows population decline with plains bison from 1861 to 89. And it's the same graph, different scale on the left side. This is, I equated a quarter of the biome, if a bison cow produced a quarter of her weight in dung, I extrapolated that to 30 million bison and then plotted it on that same graph. So these are 300 billion insects at the peak of the bison population. And by the 1890s, there was none less, of course. And there was a period, there's a vacant period where, before cattle came in, that there were no dung pad forming ungulates on the landscape. Bison and cattle are the only ones in North America that produce that pad. Everything else produces the pines. So at the end of that period, it was complete devastation for every insectivore that lived on the Great Plains or where bison lived, because their food system just suddenly collapsed. With that, I think literally tens of thousands of birds suffered as a result. We were in grasslands, and early in the spring before vegetation had time to grow, and everywhere we looked, prairie dogs were consuming dry buffalo patties. But the vegetation that they excrete contains lots of nutrients that these guys can depend upon. How do bison affect the grassland communities? It starts with, usually in the winter, with a newly rematriated population. This is where the whole system starts in the winter months. Bison don't use their feet like a horse or an elk do to forage through the snow. They use their foreheads to sweep away the vegetation or the snow, taking out the grass. And in the spring, what's left is a short little grazing lawn like this, or grazing patch. And that's the first thing to green up in the spring. This is the same grazing patch in the center. And this is exactly like mowing your lawn. You go out there and you cut it on Monday, and you got to go back and cut it on Wednesday. For bison, they rotate across the landscape, seeking out these previously grazed grazing lawns, because that's the most succulent, most digestible, instantly digestible forage that they can find. And that's what drove all the movements on the Great Plains historically, with these little wee tiny grazing lawns and patches. They constantly search for them. And then coalesce during July and August during the breeding season. The breeding season ends typically when the grasses begin to cure and they stop producing that new growth. Then the bison can't stay there for as long, so they break up into smaller herds and disperse back across the landscape. And that's what it looks like from the air. It's an incredibly complex vegetation mosaic. When you extrapolate that to the larger ecosystem, it creates tremendous heterogeneity in vegetation and everything else that depends upon it. Some of the examples of interspecies relationships, here's a pair of European starlings living in a crested wheatgrass environment. Crested wheatgrass was brought into North America during the 1930s during the Dust Bowl era as a soil stabilizing plant from Siberia. It's also incredibly invasive. It's a good forage plant in the spring for grazers, but after it's cured, it doesn't have much value and everything shifts away from it. We plotted the movements of radio-collared bison in grasslands, and they avoided this except for resting and for traveling. They didn't stay much time in there. So in a grassland system, I mentioned in '87, the park removed all the cattle. It quickly switched into a grass-dominated landscape. It was a diverse grassland, lots of different species, but there were no forbs, no flowering plants, no broadleaf plants. And as a result, you had a root system that penetrated deep up to 2 or 3 meters, but it was a very fine, fibrous root system that can't support animals that live underground, like pocketbook, for example. Bring bison back on the landscape, and it doesn't take very long of consecutively grazing those grazing patches for the grasses not to be able to sustain them. And they're eventually replaced with plants like the one on the far left, that's winter fat, it's called winter fat because cattle gain fat on it during the winter months, so high in protein. And eventually, as the grazing lawns get depleted, the roots disappear from underneath it, other herbivores like the meadows cottontail come in, and the complexity of both the above ground and below ground vegetation and roots increases tremendously. And by the time you're done, after you've got bison on that landscape it doesn't take very long, 5-10 years, you get this incredibly complex mosaic of vegetation and root systems below ground and a host of different species living on different, this is a 13-line ground squirrel, butterflies, bees, they all come back from the bison on the landscape. I mentioned the bison hair in the ecosystem. There's been lots of work done, especially in Oklahoma, looking at bison lined nests like this. This is a chickadee nest in Prince Albert National Park. And a friend in Texas just mailed us a hummingbird nest just lined entirely with buffalo hair. Incredible warmth. It hides the smell of chicks and eggs from most passing predators like raccoons or foxes. 60 to 70% increase in ground nesting bird survival. And these are some of the sensitive species that have been shown to benefit having bison hair in their nests. Johane was out one day photographing, and in a region of Grasslands National Park that the bison had just begun to colonize or to move into. This ground squirrel had certainly never seen a bison, knew what bison hair was. She recognized instantly the value of it, and she made repeated trips between the wallow where the bison had shed hair and back to her natal den. She's obviously nursing a litter underground, and she made dozens of trips back and forth, packing that down into the natal chamber because instinctively she knew the benefits of it. Wallows are one of our favorite places. There are about 63 publicly managed bison herds in North America. I think we've been to about 59 of them. And when we visit those places, we find wallows and we go there and look to see who was there before us. Wallows are the prairie guest book of Wildlife Society. That's where they go to sign the prairie guest book. So we go there and read the signatures. And tremendous numbers of species were used by bison wallows. There's a neat study done that showed that these vernal wetlands, bison wallows that have water in at the end of winter, early spring, hold water for a short period of time. In behind there are literally thousands of ancient bison wallows from the 1800s that are full of grass and other vegetation. They don't hold water like a brand new one does. It has to have exposed to clay. And that's important for species like the wood frog and spade-footed toad. And the spade-footed toad in particular has a really neat ecology related to these flooded buffalo wells. It's where they go to deposit their eggs. And from egg laying to an adult popping out of that pond, they've got the shortest metamorphosis of any amphibian reptile, only 10 days. And when they look at the morphology of the tadpoles in that pond, as the water warms and decreases in depth, the tadpole switches from having eyes that face sideways, like a typical herbivore prey species, where they consume the vegetation in the pond. As the water warms, their skull morphology changes, and they have forward-facing eyes, just like the adult ones. And they switch from being herbivores to being predators. And that whole sequence takes less than 10 days, and about the same time as that wallow will dry up. So you think of the tens of millions of wallows on the landscape in the 1800s, and suddenly they filled with vegetation and the whole structure collapsed. It was devastating for species like these amphibians. Here in the Aston Parkland, this is in Elk Island. I was out one day years ago and on patrol, and I saw this woman crawling on her hands and knees across the meadow system. It intrigued me, so I walked over and asked her what she was up to. Turned out she was a PhD candidate from Finland who was studying the slave-making behavior of one ant species on another. And to do that, she found a colony of one species of ant and then followed individual ants across the prairie. And they'd go there and collect a slave and bring that slave back, and the slave then would tend to the home colony. In doing that, she discovered that virtually every single anthill in the park was established on buffalo head. With the grazing ecology of bison there, they graze the open meadows, the dry upland slopes through the day, and then they move over to the forest edge where it's shady to have their nap and chew their cud. And typically they'll stand up and leave one of these behind. It's again my favorite topics. So this is an anthill that's established on a bison paddy. And they're important for the northern flicker. The northern flicker lives along forest edges and they create these nesting cavities. They're insectivore almost exclusively. They hunt insects. And one of their favorites is, of course, the ants. You'll see these guys hopping along the forest edge and picking up ants and feet. That's important for these guys, the northern flying squirrel. The nesting cavity of the northern flicker is the Goldilocks of cavities for these guys. It's not too big, it's not too small, it's a perfect size to fit these guys in. And these guys are fussy about the cavities that they use. They have some cavities that they use just as refugia, a place to escape, like Oslockland spine, for example. And they have others that they use as natal cavities, a place where they go, they only use it for rearing their young. And they have other cavities that they use just for their toilet. And some of these cavities, the toilet cavities in particular, they'll search for cavities that are deep, that the flicker has created a long, deep cavity. And eventually over time, that fills up. But it's important for this species. This is a little wee tiny dung beetle. And you'll only find it on squirrel dung. Nowhere else in the world will you find it. So if we didn't have bison on the landscape, this little guy couldn't exist. So it's those complex interspecies relationships that Johane and I have spent the last 14 years investigating right across North America, from the eastern hardwood forests of the States to Alaska and everywhere in between. And all of that culminated in this, our new book on bison, which you guys have so gracefully come to look at. And so with that, I'll answer any questions we might have. If you have a question, just hold up your hand and the mic will come to you. Come on, Amethyst, you must have a question. No snide remarks, just questions.
Well, that's okay. I am sure that Wes will answer any of your questions as well at the signing table. One more big round of applause for Wes and Johane. Special thank you as well to University of Regina Press, and of course to everyone who has attended our launch tonight, whether that is virtually or in person. The Ecological Buffalo is available for purchase. Feel free to grab a book from the display and make payment at our cash desk before the tills close at 8 p.m. or in about half an hour. Otherwise, thank you so much for your attendance and have a wonderful evening.
And we'll be over inside there, signing books.